Guys, today I want to dive into how I turned a failing position that was losing compared to hodling in the market, so it had a ton of divergence loss, had an actual loss, it was generating a low APR, and I felt stuck into an actual profitable position and making me money. Let's dive in. So the position I'm talking about is the one that you see on screen right here. It started out well, and if you guys have been following the channel for a couple weeks, you know exactly what I've been doing to this position. I implemented on a contingency strategy to ensure that I would make my money back as prices rise. I'm not going to dive into the nitty gritty because I've already done that on the channel before, but the first position lost about 400 bucks, still beating compared to hodling in the market, doing a 55% APR, had about 225 bucks of earnings and $130 profit versus hodl. Not bad. Second position is where it got hit. Now, it held its ground, it stayed in range, it did a decent APR of 63%, but it was down $9,800. So ultimately, Ethereum and Tau just got completely wrecked during that time frame, and I held all the way on the way down. Now, here I wasn't too worried because my goal was to make my money back as the market moves back up, and guess what? I made all the fees on the way down, all the fees on the way back up, and I would be at a profit at my break-even prices. But that was not the case because when I rebounced, I had a bunch of divergence loss. I had a loss of $1,244 compared to hodling in the market, even though I had $1,200 in earnings, right? So I'm still down compared to hodling in the market, despite doing the 200% APR. That did not matter in this situation. In the last position, again, this started to ride it back up, $3,700 in profit, but at the same exact time, it was down 400 compared to hodling in the market. So I was at crossroads because Tau was almost at the initial entry price. Ethereum was a little bit far off. So what did I do? Well, I flipped it fully into Ethereum and held a little bit of Tau. And I'm going to dive into this right over here. But before I go any further, I want to mention I've been sharing this exact journey in my free community, which is going to be linked right below this video. And not only have I been killing it in DeFi right now, everybody in my community has been killing it. This is one of our legacy members that's up 10% in just a matter of a couple days and beating compared to hodling in the market. Here's another member right over here in our free community that's profiting compared to hodling in the market at roughly 65-70% rates. And they're also doing a 620% and 420% APR. Now keep in mind these results aren't realistic for the long term. And then here's another member over here that is doing a 126% APR, keeping the majority of their earnings because they don't have much divergence loss. Let's dive into it, guys. You can see my deposits and withdrawals for each of the individual positions because there were 4 positions here amongst the overall strategy. Now I started with $30,700 and I withdrew $24,500. And when we do the math, my total deposits, including all the compounded earnings, because I did compound all the earnings, was $34,370. Now I had roughly $3,100 of earnings, so when we subtract the earnings from that running total, my initial deposits were roughly $31,250. So I injected a little bit more capital along the way, just excess cash that was sitting in my wallet essentially. These are the two important numbers, initial deposits versus total deposits. Initial deposits is how much I put into this pool. Total deposits is how much I put into this pool after earnings. So remember, our goal is to always make all the money back. We want to get to $34,370. Why? Because that way we keep all the earnings we earned along the way. Whereas worst case scenario, your contingency strategy isn't the best, or maybe you're just in a really bad situation, you make back your initial deposits, right? That's what I want to get at worst case scenario. So what I actually did in this scenario was converted nearly everything at this last withdrawal of $24,500 into ETH. And then I leveraged that over on Aave. Now here's the thing, I had $24,322 of ETH and $1,200 of Tau. Now my initial entry price was $24.75, and I did this at a price of roughly $17.20. Meaning if I just held all the ETH to my initial entry price, I would have a break even, but I wanted to lower my risk. And the way I lower my risk is by lowering my break even price, which is what I did by adding a little bit of leverage. I borrowed $5,000 against ETH in USDC, converted that straight back to ETH, which gave me $29,000 of exposure to ETH, in which when I ended off this strategy, we went to a total of $43,000 in notional value, which we subtracted the $5,000, and that puts us at a $37,000, nearly $38,000 net value right there, which means I was able to turn $24,500 into $39,600 with 1.2x leverage on ETH, but also just not having any exposure to liquidity pools. This right here was more profitable than liquidity pools. Why? Because in the time span of about 5 days, I generated $15,000. Okay, and yes, I would have caught some upside in the liquidity pools on the way back up. But guess what? That strategy was failing. It was losing to divergence loss consistently, doing a low APR, meaning it did not make sense to take the risk of liquidity pools when I could just hodl in the market, forgo the APR, but at the same exact time have full market exposure and be able to attach a little bit of leverage. That you cannot do in the liquidity pools. So this strategy ultimately ended up winning right here. Now, what did I do? Now that it went to $39,000, I actually exited it and put it into liquidity pools, right? Not the TAL liquidity pool, but now that that strategy was profitable, and I do say profitable because it did come out to an overall profit of roughly $8,500, because keep in mind, we started with 31,250 and we ended with 39,600. I jumped into AIOZ paired with Ethereum, doing well so far at 130% APR. Jumped into Ethereum to Aether, one of my best pools that made me over 7 grand so far. This one is losing compared to HODL so far, so we will see how this goes. But there's only a $10,000 allocation here. And I injected a little bit more capital into Ethereum to Edge, which I need to monitor a little bit more closely because it is close to going at a range, but I am still immensely profitable compared to HODL in the market. And this is realistically doing about a 100% APR. I also have this $30,000 Radium position over here, which is doing very, very well. This position was previously in range for 2 months, and then I rebalanced, and now it's been in range for, I want to say, 2 weeks or so, doing a 90% APR, and has about $600 in pinned in yield. So I'm very, very happy with the results over here as well. So guys, now that the market is going back up, it is time to put a strategy in place and make sure that you are prepared for the upside. A lot of us rode that market on the way down. It was brutal. Some of us got kind of washed out and left the industry and are now coming back. Others have stayed out of range and position. Some have implemented contingency strategies. My point is you have to get creative and you have to kind of forego just the, oh, I'm going to stick everything in LPs while the market is going down, or even just in general. And that's exactly what I did. It turned out successful for me. And now my portfolio is at a much, much better situation because I actually profited during the downturn. I accumulated more assets, and now that those assets are going back up, I am at an immense profit. Not to mention, I have my market neutral portfolio generating consistent yield, which I'm using to bring back into essentially market exposed assets like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, and more. Anyways, if you guys want to stay up to date with what I'm doing in the market, again, you can join up on the free community. If you want to put a strategy in place, I do have a one-on-one coaching program that you guys can check out. And with that being said, otherwise, just make sure to drop a like, subscribe, notifications turned on, because I'm going to keep you guys up to date with what I'm currently doing in the market now that we're back in the bull run. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.